Warning, we are not your attorneys. Please, don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Geoff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derek.
And you are listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is now sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
This episode is going to be a little different, thanks to some logistical mix-ups, and I'm really living up to the most capable label here. Derek and Mike will not be joining us for this episode. However, I am joined today by a special guest, Megan Matthews. Megan, welcome to the Not So Grand Jury.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. For the audience, Megan is a partner at the Denver-based firm Ogborn Mihm. She focuses mostly on litigating medical malpractice cases and has a very busy appellate law practice as well. She is currently president-elect of the Colorado Trial Lawyers Association, and you will start your term in the presidency next week. So congratulations on that. By the time this comes out, you will be in office. In her role with the Colorado Trial Lawyers Association, she works on passing legislation, including laws focused on helping patients injured from medical malpractice. She also teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of Denver's Strum College of Law. So, Megan, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion of The Good Doctor. And this was your selection for us today, yes?
Yeah, you gave me some suggestions, and I had never actually seen it. And I always am partial for an Orlando Bloom film. So it was an interesting watch, I will say that.
It was. I had never seen it before. Yeah, in case it isn't already obvious, this week we are discussing The Good Doctor. This is a 2011 film starring Orlando Bloom that is not to be confused with The Good Doctor TV show on ABC that I think has Richard Schiff in it and some other people who I don't know. But the 2011 film is about a young doctor, Martin Blake, played by Orlando Bloom. He develops an obsession with one of his patients, Diane Nixon. After her initial treatment is successful and she is discharged from the hospital, he starts to manipulate her medication, forcing her to be readmitted to the hospital. He continues to undermine her treatment in order to keep her there. She eventually dies because of all this, forcing him to cover his tracks. An orderly, played by Michael Pena, discovers Diane's journal and threatens to reveal its contents to hospital administrators. Dr. Blake placates him by, for a little while, providing him with prescription drugs until it becomes clear that the orderly is not going to give Blake the journal, this incriminating journal. Blake then gives the orderly tainted drugs that ends up killing him. Blake ultimately succeeds in covering his tracks and concealing his involvement in both deaths. So really ending on an up note there. Megan, so that you're aware, at the start, we like to make sure we clarify what jurisdiction we're talking about. And although I don't think it's made clear in the movie, from a little bit of research, it's supposed to be set in a hospital in California. I don't think it's ever explicitly stated. But Megan, feel free to talk about whichever jurisdiction you want. The specific citations I'm going to be talking about are California specific. So yeah, let's talk about medical malpractice. You're our guest. Where would you like to start?
Since you brought up jurisdictions, I'll just note that where jurisdictions really differ when it comes to medical malpractice are in two major ways. The first, which is the most devastating, frankly, to injured patients, are caps or limitations on damages, the amount that an injured patient can recover. So every state there are many states, there's at least I believe it's currently 16 states that do not have any types of limitation for medical malpractice claims on what an injured patient can recover, but all the other states do have caps. California has caps. They did raise their caps several years ago through the legislature, through the California Trial Lawyers Association. And we, in Colorado, also had very oppressive caps that had not changed since 1988, stuck at $300,000 for pain and suffering, impairment and disfigurement losses, and then a total overall $1 million cap for everything. We break these down into what we call economic and non-economic damages. Economic are those that have a specific number, concrete number you can attach to them. So medical bills, your lost income, things like that. And then non-economic damages, which I mentioned before, are everything that you have to pick a number or ask the jury to put a number on it. but there's not a specific assignable value to that. So pain, suffering, impairment, like your inability to do activities of daily living or sports or live your life, or disfigurement,
Right.
like scars, amputation, things like that. So that was $300,000 for that non-economic damages. And then for the economic damages, we had combined total $1 million cap in Colorado, what we call soft cap. I don't recall what California's caps are, but that would not affect Medical Malpractice Act analysis. And then the second way that most jurisdictions differ is really just the process of initiating a lawsuit. Some states have really rigorous rules about how to start a malpractice claim. Like Texas and Montana have these things called medical review boards, where they make you jump through a whole bunch of hoops and have panels of doctors and other professionals evaluate whether your claim lacks merit or not. And it's basically a bunch of hoops to jump through. And if you don't follow the procedure perfectly, you lose the right to bring a malpractice lawsuit. California doesn't have those types of barriers. Beyond that, California and Colorado, jurisdictionally, most of our laws are pretty similar.
Okay, that's good to know. So there are two patients in particular that I think seem to have at least a medical malpractice claim. The first being
Mr. Sanchez.
Mr. Sanchez, yes, who is a patient that Dr. Blake sees at the beginning of the movie, who doesn't speak any English, and Dr. Blake does not speak any Spanish.
How are you, Mr. Sanchez?
No hablo inglés.
Oh. No hablo español.
Doctor, fíjate, no me siento bien aquí en mi pecho. Tengo mucho dolor aquí. Necesito medicina. No me siento
Excuse
bien.
me, one moment.
Por favor, doctor.
Dr. Page, do you speak Spanish?
No.
Nurse here.
Can you cough? Thank you. Okay, you need a lot of sleep. You need to rest.
Descansa.
Yes, that's what you need, okay?
It seems to me that would be a very dangerous situation for a doctor to be in, when you have the patient sitting in front of you, and just because you haven't bothered to go find you're in California, somebody speaks Spanish. You're in Southern California, to be specific, or more specific, and you just haven't bothered, or I guess don't want to give up the patient. If Mr. Sanchez came into your office, what would the intake process be like for someone like this?
Sure. So we look at a variety of factors, but every case, I'm a tort lawyer, and so tort, not tarts. And we always go back to, just a side note here, I liked torts class a lot, but I never intended to practice and be a tort lawyer.
Oh,
Had
okay.
zero intention of doing that. I wanted to be an international law lawyer. And the second
Don't we all?
took the bar, it dropped right out of my head. But now that I do practice it, I am constantly haunted by the memory of first year torts class of duty, breach, causation, damages. And that is what we look at. Those four factors are really important. Now, in a motor vehicle collision case or something like that, it's really pretty easy to evaluate those claims and determine whether it's a case worthy of pursuing. So if it's a rear end collision, liability is pretty obvious. And there's a duty to be reasonably careful driver. Everybody has that duty. There's no heightened duty. But in medical malpractice, it becomes much more complicated. The duty is there. Doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers, they have a duty. That one's easy, check. The second one, which is liability, that's where things get a lot more complicated in medical malpractice. So if you breach your duty in a motor vehicle collision case, there's some cases that are harder. You're in a roundabout, hate those cases. Who's at fault in a roundabout? But when it comes to medical malpractice, we have to ask, did the healthcare provider do what another reasonably careful physician in this case would do in same or similar circumstances in the same specialty? So it's not always clear, and I am not a medical doctor, I'm the most worthless kind of doctor, which is a Juris Doctorate. We don't even get to be called doctors. Chiropractors do for some reason, but we don't. And that's fine. But I don't even play one on TV, but I do a lot of medical research. So I'm constantly looking at medical journals and doing deeper research, reading medical text, and trying to determine what reasonably careful physicians, in this case, an internal medicine doctor, would do in same or similar circumstances. And so Dr. Blake, if he wanted to get into the infectious disease track program, if he was in fact an infectious disease doctor and been boarded that way, he would have a different standard than he does as an internal medicine doctor. He's not expected to know quite as much. And so that does factor into the treatment of certain patients, right? And so we're always looking for that. And then the third step is causation, which is also very hard in medical malpractice cases. Again, you have a rear end collision and someone gets whiplash, and the person behind them was driving 60 miles an hour and rams into a fully stopped vehicle, and that person gets whiplash, their head goes back, goes forward, and they get a brain injury, maybe even hit their head on their windshield, I don't know, or the airbags go off. It's pretty easy to say that rear end collision caused their injuries. But in medical malpractice claims, it's not so clear. And so you have to try to figure out what exactly caused that patient's injuries. And in medical malpractice claims, Mr. Sanchez came in with some pre-existing unknown condition. We don't know why he's there. He needs rest is the prescription from Dr. Blake, but we don't know why. We don't know what's wrong with him. And so we have to analyze this. And then the last factor is damages or the losses. And you notice I'm not being specific yet because it's really important to be able to look at the totality. So damages, again, in a motor vehicle collision case, we don't really worry about that. We always hear ambulance chasers. I hate that term, but there are some ambulance chasing personal injury attorneys out there. And the reason why is because you don't have to really make money in this industry and help people. You do need to be a great lawyer. You really do. But you can also settle some cases and get some things done without being great. And so you can settle a case for $10,000. And if going to trial on those cases, the cheapest one I ever did in cost for two people, both friends, was $25,000 trial cost all in. In Colorado, an average medical malpractice case cost about $350,000 in trial cost. And that doesn't include attorney's fees. That's just the cost of hiring experts, doing depositions, all of that. Because in every jurisdiction I'm aware of, you are required to hire experts to testify about every aspect of the medicine. If you don't, you automatically lose your case. And they are not cheap. They usually charge between $700 and $2,500 an hour to testify. So unfortunately, in an auto case, I don't really worry about how much their medical bills are or how much their lost income is. In a medical malpractice case, I do. And in Colorado, unless your medical bills are about $500,000 or more, because of the cap of the non-economic damages, that pain and suffering at $300,000, we did change that law, my organization, CTLA, effective January 1, 2025, to a whopping $415,000 for that.
Ooh.
And then it went up to $555,000 for 2026, and it will continue to grow over the next 5 years. And then will be based on inflationary rates thereafter. So it will continue to grow. So patients will be entitled to more and more justice. But in Colorado, you have an unlimited amount you can recover if a doctor hits you with their car for your disfigurement or impairment than if they sever your spine and render you a quadriplegic. So it doesn't make math sense sometimes, unfortunately. This is a true story, I get these calls all the time. The most obvious liability, the doctor has committed malpractice and it caused my client's injuries, but their medical bills are $50,000. And the insurance company for the doctor, the main one in Colorado is named Copic, they know that. And so they're never going to settle. And so I'm not going to spend $300,000 to get my client $50,000 because they will never get to see a penny of that. I might make some money. Some of the doctors will make money, but the client won't. And as a fiduciary, I have to put my client's financial interests ahead of my own. So going back to Dr. Sanchez, obviously there's a duty. Was there a breach? Did Dr. Blake commit medical malpractice? It is unclear from the facts what happened. If it was actually the nurse that messed up, sounds like the nurse probably messed up, the one that got fired for mixing up the vancomycin versus the penicillin, sounds like.
What is this? This doesn't make sense.
Another allergic reaction, doctor?
No. This is something else. See? Vancomycin, not a penicillin reaction. It wasn't my mistake.
Yeah, looks like red man syndrome. That can happen
when someone misadministers vancomycin, which doesn't surprise me because I never thought that Teresa beyond her attitude was all that sharp about these things.
All right, I'll look into it.
Oh, I'm really so sorry, doctor.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Marion, I'm really busy.
You know what? They just let me go, and before you hear it from anyone else, I messed up Mr. Sanchez's vancomycin. I switched the sheet, and I just panicked. I'm just sorry if I jeopardized a patient.
I thought it was Teresa.
No, she didn't know anything about it.
It's a little unclear. And then there's also a question of whether his allergy was properly documented. So again, that would have been a nursing error, not a doctor error. It is possible under liability, depending on the evidence you could get. It sounds like there was a breach of the nursing standard of care to not document file. And so that was a breach. And then did it cause Mr. Sanchez's injuries? Yes. He clearly had some kind of unknown adverse reaction, but we don't know what he was in there for. So if his pre-existing condition is very similar to what his adverse reaction was,
Sure.
then now...
Sure. Could it just be a flare-up of whatever that was?
And they will defend the heck out of these cases. They defend. So if the symptoms overlap or he had prior issues with similar symptoms, they will claim it's that. He had a flare-up of that, not some allergic reaction. I don't know, whatever it was, because it's a little confusing exactly what happened. He was on some type of antibiotic for some unknown thing. We don't know. But the last problem here, and the reason I would not take Mr. Sanchez's case, and I would feel very bad, and I'd give him some reporting options. I would say report the hospital, the Department of Health, report the nurses, or maybe even the doctor if you thought they were, and so they could be investigated. But Mr. Sanchez probably has no damages because they just switched him to the correct thing. And so he was already in the hospital. So what are his medical bills? The cost of the unnecessary penicillin and maybe some anti-inflammatories or some extra fluids. So he probably has $5,000 in losses maybe. And so...
Right. I imagine if I was the hospital administrator and this happened, I'd be like, we're not charging him for those.
Yeah. So there's actually, if he was on Medicare and Medicaid, they're legally not allowed to charge them. But guess what? They do.
Oh.
You're not supposed to. It's actually Medicaid or Medicare fraud if you charge for treatment based on malpractice. But they do it all the time.
Interesting. Does it have to be like adjudicated to have been? How does Medicare and Medicaid know that it would?
That is the great question, Geoff.
Okay.
Yep. So if they know and Medicare or Medicaid decides to pursue it, but most of those are brought only when they're systemic level issues. And usually they're brought through whistleblower claims and what are called key TAM actions, where a whistleblower will bring those claims on behalf of the government to try to really hopefully get a between 10 and 25% whistleblower fee for Medicare and Medicaid fraud. But yeah, so Mr. Sanchez has a medical malpractice claim, but it would probably never be litigated and he would probably never get compensated, unfortunately.
I don't think qui tam actions have ever come up on the podcast before, and I am not going to crack open that can of worms right now. But that's an interesting, I'm wondering.
Yeah, if people are bored, Google Rick Scott and his largest Medicare fraud payout. Now he's a sitting senator. I don't remember the number. I want to say it's something insane, like $70 billion or $10 billion. I don't know. I'm making numbers up now, but Google Rick Scott Medicare fraud. So
interesting.
Huge thing. But yeah. And then do you want me to, should I do Diane Nixon's potential?
First, I have a couple of questions for you before we get there. And one is, we've talked a bit about causation. And I think it's important, since our audience are not lawyers, that that we talk about in the legal context what causation means, that we mean what is the proximate cause of someone's injury, and not just was your action 5 steps back in the chain of events a factor in whatever happened. And I think that is an important distinction to make. Mr. Sanchez would not have been injured had Dr. Blake or the nurse, whichever, taken whatever action they took. The other question I have for you was because one of the nurses is repeatedly asking Dr. Blake what the heck he has written in various charts.
Excuse me, what does that say?
Penicillin.
Patient can be discharged today.
Is that ever a factor in medical malpractice where the doctor's handwriting, because of course there's the cliche of doctor's handwriting being completely illegible. It's mostly that I'm curious. Has that ever been a factor in a case where the doctor was just so unclear in what they were trying to communicate?
So let me address causation really quickly first, and then I'll go back to the handwriting. So causation, the way that we discuss it as trial lawyers and medical malpractice is, and I'm pretty sure every state does this, it only has to be a cause. So it has to be a but-for cause, but it doesn't have to be the only cause. So Mr. Sanchez's medical reaction, his adverse reaction, could be due in part to a combination. Let's say they gave him too much fluid as well, but that's not negligent. And so that contributed to the reaction, or he had a pre-existing condition that affected his reaction that someone else without it would not have had the reaction. So there are multiple causes, but a cause was the mix-up in penicillin for vancomycin, and that's all you have to prove. And then for those non-lawyers, we have to prove more likely than not, which is 50.1% or more. So just the tiniest tipping of the scales. And that's all we have to prove, that more likely than not, a cause of his adverse reaction and resulting, as we say, damages was the malpractice. So that's something we always look for, because otherwise it would be impossible to ever win these cases. And then going back to the handwriting, the one thing that was very unrealistic about this movie, among many things, was the fact that doctors and hospitals do not handwrite things. They dictate because their handwriting is atrocious. That doesn't happen. That is not realistic, especially in 2011. If this was 1979, I'd be like, okay, fair enough. But doctors notoriously do have bad handwriting for some weird reason. It's like their smart part of the brain doesn't apply to handwriting. Not sure what's going on there.
It's like lawyers and math. You know?
Yeah, lawyers and math. Totally true. I used to be really good at math. I almost became a chemist. And then now it all fell out of my head. But yeah, so I've never seen any medical malpractice. The only time I see really detailed handwritten notes, frankly, are in very small practices, usually much older doctors. Almost all practices now, and certainly all facilities by 2011, hospitals, had EMRs, or electronic medical record systems. And the reason I particularly know this is that in 2008, when Obama passed what is now known as Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, he had a correlative bill called HITECH that was part of HIPAA. And HITECH said, hey, any medical facility out there in all of America, if you choose to go electronic or are using electronic medical records, you are absolutely required to give your client their records electronically. And for hospitals or facilities that weren't electronic, the government gave them money to go electronic. And so by 2011, you could actually go and find and download Excel spreadsheets of all facilities that had taken HITECH money and or were registered as electronic. And I believe the stats were like 99% of all hospitals were fully on electronic medical record systems. And then doctors dictate their notes, and then those are put into the electronic medical record system. So no nurse would ever say that they couldn't. Now, they would give orders, but what happens is almost always the orders are given verbally to the nurses, and then the nurses write it down for them, or they tell a resident. So rarely are doctors handwriting things in hospitals. It's possible, but I doubt that you'd have a confusion like that. And I've never seen one. Probably somewhere, maybe.
I will say it's interesting because I'm thinking back to a couple of cases I've had where particularly notes from psychiatrists were important. And this is not the hospital setting, so perhaps that's the distinction. But there were a bunch of handwritten notes, which I suppose makes sense because you're writing down what the person is saying as you're going through the process of psychiatring. But that actually raises an interesting question for me. And is the standard different for psychiatry versus surgery or internal medicine?
Yeah, and psychiatrists do a lot of handwritten notes. So those are those solo, smaller practice offices that do, like, I see them at podiatrists, like ophthalmologists. They tend to do a lot more handwritten notes. And the difference is when you're on a team. So hospitals are inherently team-based practices. And so you have to be able to communicate that care. Whereas a psychiatrist isn't working on a team 99% of the time, unless they're obviously in a hospital or some type of care team setting. Sure. And there are still places that do handwritten notes. Don't get me wrong. I actually have a really horrible child-on-child sex assault case from a mental health facility where they do not have an electronic medical record. Everything is handwritten to the record, including this child's or specific order. So actually, I guess I do have a case, now that I think about it, where he had specific orders that he was supposed to be on a one-on-one is what it's called. So he was never supposed to be unattended unless he was in bed. He was supposed to be with a staff person at all times. And the boy that assaulted him was also on a 1-to-1 order and had already assaulted 3 other children. And no one seemed to be paying attention to the one-on-one order. And we even have information from one of the witnesses who said there were other things like his milk allergy, and she kept putting giant sticky notes on his file to be like, hello, pay attention. And so I don't know if it's a handwriting issue, but it's more of a documentation issue. People aren't either reading the file or aren't writing it down at all. And so I think in that case, it's just a lack of documentation and not a handwriting issue. But, but it is important. One thing that is required, we call it the standard of care in medical malpractice. That is the duty. Frankly, it is absolutely always a standard of care in any team setting that you are expected to read the notes of other providers and know the file and to document the file. It is absolutely the standard of care. So I've had cases where there's documentation errors, but it's never been handwriting in any of the cases I've worked on.
Okay.
That was a long answer.
No, that's fine. That's why we have these conversations, because I get curious too. And you're our subject matter expert, so I'm going to ask. So, okay, with those sort of preliminary questions out of the way, let's talk about Diane Nixon, the patient that is at the crux of the movie. As I was watching, I was trying to think, is what he is doing does it qualify as malpractice because he is acting intentionally the entire time? How does that play into things?
So while it technically falls under the realm of an intentional or of medical malpractice, it is an intentional medical malpractice as opposed to a tortious or negligent malpractice. And then the middle line in there is reckless or willful wanton acts where you aren't intending to hurt somebody, but you're acting with more than negligence, which negligence is just you're not being reasonable, right? Whereas reckless means you not only are being unreasonable, you're being so unreasonable that you have a willful disregard for the safety of others. So
you're actively not caring.
Exactly. And so that allows us to get what are called punitive or exemplary damages. And every state's a bit different, but in Colorado, in medical malpractice claims, whatever you recover from the jury, they can also award you up to that same amount. They can award you whatever you want, but the second they walk out of the courtroom, the judge, because of the caps, has to cut it down. That's the worst part about caps. Juries don't know, which is really frustrating. So but intentional torts, technically you can recover for them. Absolutely. So you would say this was intentional act, and you would have to say it does breach the standard of care, which would be pretty easy to do, and it caused the injury. But then more importantly, it was actually intentionally done. The problem is intentional torts are not usually covered by insurance. So unless the person has assets, in this case, Dr. Blake, who's living in an okay apartment in some California town and
Sure.
has either doesn't care or can't afford furniture for most of his apartment. He has
He was really piecemeal putting his apartment
one little
together.
speaker set and a bottle of wine with one glass and his bed. He bought a new bag for himself. But most people don't have assets, or they transfer them away, or don't have a lot. An average doctor in the U.S. is insured by only $1 million of insurance. It's been that way since 1980, which obviously doesn't go very far. Some doctors are starting to get $2 million policies, but it is very rare right now. So unless Dr. Blake has assets that you can pursue, attach, and get, you may have no recovery there, or very minimal.
I didn't even think about that aspect of it. That makes a lot of sense.
So we try to classify everything. It sounds really messed up, but I don't do a lot of sex assault, but one of the partners at my last firm did. And he was always trying to find ways to classify a sex assault as a negligent sex assault. Unfortunately, in the medical malpractice case, it happens more than you think, especially massage therapists and chiropractors. We've been able to often classify them somewhat, I think, with the agreement of the defending attorney, defense counsel, that it was a negligent finger penetration or a negligent thing like that, which is pretty disturbing, but that's how they often do it. And so it is possible that Dr. Blake's defense team and maybe even his insurance carrier would agree that he negligently kept changing out her IV bags and negligently swapped her, presumably, antibiotics for sugar.
Right. Negligent manually disassembled her pills.
Yes.
The sugar.
He tripped and fell. No, I can't imagine that. I assume he would be criminally prosecuted for that as well if they ever caught him. But I think in theory, yes, it's a medical malpractice claim, but would you ever be able to recover? Probably not, because it's an intentional act.
I have a medical ethics question, but I don't know if you would feel comfortable getting into that realm.
I'll tell you either way.
Dr. Blake being invited to the patient's house for dinner. That struck me as, if I was in that position as a lawyer, I would not join the family for dinner. And that's, hey, my daughter really wanted you to come to dinner. I'm like, I appreciate the invite, but no. I presume that the standard is essentially the same for doctors, where if he's starting some sort of romantic relationship with a patient, although it seemed like maybe it was the patient's sister that was really the one who wanted him to come to dinner. So maybe there's not an ethical problem with I don't know. But I was curious as I was watching, what are the ethical ramifications of that? And I don't know if you want to weigh in on that. And if not, we'll just cut this out and it'll be like it never happened.
I don't know the answer to your question, but my educated guess, it's very similar to attorneys, as you were referencing. I thought it was just weird, but I will also say, I couldn't see there being an ethical issue unless he started having a relationship with her while she was actively his patient, whether Diane, and definitely no issue with the sister. I think it's just weird and a bad judgment. But I'll be candid, in the lawyer realm, you can't get gifts from your clients and you don't want personal relationships, like on a physical level, romantic relationships, but you get very close with your clients. And I usually take my clients out to a restaurant or something. But if a client that I'd gone through, and we recommend going to our clients' homes as personal injury and medical malpractice attorneys that are really injured to see their life. So, for example, I had a client who had a perforated bowel, and she had rheumatoid arthritis. And so she was on some immunosuppressive medications, methotrexate and Humira. And so what it does is suppress your immune system. And so you can't see if you have an infection through normal markers. You don't get a fever.
Sure.
Your white blood cell count doesn't elevate because your body isn't fighting. And so they didn't recognize that she was going septic, even though some other signs were there. And so she was getting more and more septic because when you have a perforated bowel, in essence, your poop is basically leaking into your body. And so sepsis is discussed in the movie, and he says it's blood-borne, but it's basically sepsis is any time you have infectious agents outside of where they're supposed to be and start circulating in different parts of your system and eventually into your bloodstream, and then it takes over your whole body. And so now you basically have an infection in your entire body. And so you have to stop the source of it. And they just didn't recognize it. And they put her on a medication called vasopressors. And that's great. What it does is because what happened is she coded 10 times and almost died. They brought her back 10 times. She's a walking miracle. But what happened is they needed the blood to go to her heart and brain because she was dying. So they gave her this medication and it pumps it from your limbs to your heart and brain. Great. Except now you have no blood in your hands or feet. So she had both of her hands amputated and part of both of her feet. And so she's quite the most resilient woman you've ever met. But she didn't have any hands anymore. And so the question is, how do you live your life? We did go to her home and we're like, eat dinner, open a can. How do you go to the bathroom? Show us your house. And so she had to install bidets. They had to take all the doorknobs off their house because she can't turn doorknobs anymore. She got stuck in an airplane bathroom once because there's like a little hook to get out, like the little handle that you have to pop out.
Sure.
Yeah. So she was stuck in there for 15 minutes and finally got smarter. Like she was so brilliant. She grabbed the hand sanitizer and used the handle to pop herself out. But she showed us all these creative ways she does things around her home so we could understand and really understand what she was struggling with. So it's not abnormal for us to go into our clients' homes. And then when you get really close with people, I would never be inappropriate. But yeah, I could see I wouldn't do it right away. But if my client was like, I'd love to cook dinner for you, please come over, I would do that in my field. Okay. I think it would be different if I was just like a tax lawyer. And also, I would only probably even more friendly beyond our professional. I'd always maintain professionalism, but I could see after the case is done, being a bit more of a friend and checking in on them and seeing them once a year, things like that. I could see us getting close through that struggle.
Sure. That makes sense.
So I could see doctors doing that too. But I just thought the way their family was and the way it happened, he wasn't doing it in a way that he was weird. He was being weird.
Yeah. He was weird.
Yeah.
He is manipulating her medication, swapping out IV fluids. And I'm curious, as I was watching, I thought, what kinds of controls are hospitals supposed to have on who has access to the medication? He just walks into to the pharmacy, essentially, and does whatever he wants.
What are you doing down here, Doc? Is there something I can help you with? Just get her out of here.
I'll say, my dad's a pharmacist and has worked in hospitals, and I don't think that would have flown. But have you ever handled a case where a doctor had access to things that they weren't supposed to, or had access to the pharmacy and was allowed? And then maybe it's partly the hospital's liability, not that I imagine it's generally the hospital's liability too. But
I think he was in a supply room instead of the pharmacy based on what I was guessing. And my educated guesses, I think he was swapping out her antibiotics for just saline solution, which would probably not be controlled.
Okay.
And that's why she probably didn't have an adverse effect to that. It was probably just fluids.
Gotcha.
And so I'm guessing just hydrating fluids. It's probably what he swapped out.
And also that wouldn't show up on blood work.
Yeah. So. And so I think that's what he was doing. I don't know. They didn't specify or show exactly what he was doing, but that was my educated guess. And that's the only thing I could imagine he could do that wouldn't harm her in some other way. He was just allowing her infection to get worse by not giving her the powerful antibiotics she needed to fight her, in essence, her UTI, now kidney infection. But that I don't know the answer to. I assume doctors can prescribe, and especially critical care doctors, I assume that certain types of things is also in a supply room, but probably more controlled, probably with a swipe bag. I know some hospitals have glass windows and they have to go request it, but I genuinely don't know. Every hospital is really different. So I would imagine some things like really basic stuff, they might have easier access to, but more controlled substances, they probably have to go to the pharmacist and someone has to pick it up. But I'm sorry, I don't know the specific answer to your question.
That's all right. I'm sure I'll get a text from my dad when this episode drops, explaining exactly how that works. But, I didn't think to ask him before we recorded. So he is acting obviously quite intentionally here, and that doesn't take it out of the realm of medical malpractice, but it also brings in criminal law aspects, especially after he dies, or after she dies. And I can see that probably with some regularity, malpractice claims and criminal investigations can happen in the same circumstances. First, let me ask, have you handled any situations where there were criminal implications in a case you were handling?
Yeah, it wasn't my direct case. I helped on it, but it was the partner of my firm's case. And it was actually got international attention. A plastic surgeon named Geoff was performing a breast augmentation on an 18-year-old girl who was very flat chested, and her parents said trip to Europe or boob job. And she said boob job. So wouldn't be my offer to my child, but every family does their own thing. And so she went in and got it. And the anesthesiologist who'd had prior issues, a nurse anesthesiologist, overdosed her it was at a surgical center, so not a full hospital, where they don't have full ability to resuscitate someone and they don't have critical care types of services. So he did what's called snow her, gave her a little too much to try to get her to go to sleep faster. And she became non-responsive. And they were clearly afraid. And so the doctor instructed everybody not to call 911. And instead they performed CPR on her for 7 hours.
Jeez.
And when you don't get the right type of oxygen to your brain, your brain starts dying. Her parents are waiting for her, what should be an hour, and waiting. And so they finally get her to the hospital and discover what's happened. There was video, and they never gave it to us. We fought, and they ended up settling it. But he was criminally prosecuted for manslaughter and convicted. And he was investigated by his board. And do you think they took away his board certification?
Since you're asking me, I'm going to say no.
That is correct. He continued to be a practicing plastic surgeon until a year later, when something very similar happened.
Of course.
And so he finally lost his ability to practice medicine, but could have just gone to Utah then, or traveled to Texas. And a lot of times they don't investigate their certifications or don't care. So Dr. Kim could easily cross state lines and be practicing in some other state.
Wow. That's fun.
Yeah. If you're bored, Google John Oliver medical boards. He has a whole study about this. I knew it was happening, but his investigation is absolutely mind-blowing.
His coverage of coroners really stuck with me.
Crazy.
So in those circumstances where you have criminal investigations going on, does the civil stuff have to sit on pause while that goes on?
No, they can happen simultaneously, but the DAs, and at least in Colorado, I can't speak to other states, they will not give us their files until the case is done, unless you've got a friend somewhere. But 99% of the time, you can't get the file, which may or may not be important. The problem is that even the police sometimes have a hard time getting the evidence in these cases because of several sets of laws that most states have, and there's even a federal one. And at the hospital level, so if this was Dr. Sanchez, for example, there was an incident report, right? Incident reports, usually known as adverse incident reports, are the internal reporting mechanism for what they call near misses. For example, Dr. Sanchez ended up, sounds like bouncing back. So they probably call that, even though he was harmed, a near miss. Or maybe not. Maybe they would have marked it as actual, like, full incident. Maybe they almost gave him penicillin and someone realized it and stopped right before. So they might call that a near miss. They also have what are called occurrence reports or other types of things that they report into usually an electronic database. Sometimes they're paper about when things go wrong. And the point of them is they're supposed to document, but also investigate, how do we fix this from happening again? In Colorado, we call it the quality management statute. It's also known as quality assurance in some states. At the federal level, it's known as the Patient Safety and Quality Insurance Improvement Act. And these laws protect facilities, any healthcare facility, for any time they do anything to improve patient safety. Those investigations and reports are completely secret. They cannot be shared at all with anybody for any reason. And peer review is what doctors are specifically under. You'll notice they're sitting around a table a couple times talking through cases.
All right. Nick's signs are okay. No pain, no spikes. She's out of here.
Just another day, to be sure.
Oh, I already signed her out. Let's move on. Mr. Sanchez.
So we'll go down.
Part of that is for roundtabling, discharging. But let's talk about Dr. Sanchez more, investigate it. They might do what's called a peer review and investigate whether Dr. Blake, they think, committed malpractice. And so if they were like, Dr. Blake was high on cocaine and he gave Mr. Sanchez penicillin incorrectly, he committed malpractice. That would also be completely secret. We would never get that doctor. And so the problem is, even in criminal cases, it can be very difficult for the investigating officers to get some of this documentation, and even because it's secret and it can't be used in any context. So they can investigate the witnesses, they can talk to people can testify about what they saw, but the underlying documents we're not entitled to. I've gotten them a few times. There's an exception in Colorado called the factual exception. So I'm entitled to the underlying facts. Me and several of my colleagues have convinced judges that we are entitled to those reports, and they have to redact the opinions about what they think went wrong and why and how to improve it. But we get to know the who, when, where, why, how. And I have gotten those in a few cases. I have them to be disclosed in my terrible minor on minor case, but they are fighting really hard. I have not gotten them, and I suspect they're going to try to settle just to avoid giving them to me.
Sure.
We'll see.
Yeah, I guess that is not surprising.
Yep. So getting the evidence is hard in both contexts. I think in the criminal context, they can probably get more, but what's hard is they're not supposed to be admissible for any purpose. So I don't know how, I'm unclear on how they would prove all that in court. In Dr. Jeffrey Kim's case, they did have a video, and so that wasn't fortunately protected. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Come with me, please. Mr. Sanchez is allergic to penicillin.
Well, it doesn't say so on it. This isn't the original admit sheet. Where's the original?
I don't know what you're talking about.
On the original sheet, it said NKA, known allergies.
Did you ask him?
He doesn't speak English. If you knew he was allergic, why'd you give him penicillin?
Because you're the doctor, I only do what you say.
Okay, let's get a Benadryl line in this.
I already took care of it.
Thank you.
Where are you going?
To file an incident report.
A what? Why?
This is an incident, it's procedure. And can you rewrite this legibly? What are you doing?
I'm looking for the original admit sheet.
I'm sorry, doctor, but whatever it is you're looking for, you're not going to find it there.
You mentioned incident reports and things like that. We see one of the nurses who initially thinks it was Dr. Blake's fault that Mr. Sanchez suffered whatever this reaction was. And she reports him, and there's essentially a meeting where he defends himself to some degree and then also does his own little investigation, determines that it was the nurse's fault. Is that the sort of incident report process? Is that anywhere close to how that would actually function?
No, definitely not. So what they have are they have a risk management department is what they call it, which tells you everything. Risk Yay.
Sure.
And then they also have what are called peer review committees and quality management committees. And so what they do, depending on how the facility is structured, what they'll do is they'll have a group of people, usually with some doctors and then nurses, and then usually one person at what we call the C-suite level, the corporate executives, usually the chief medical officer or the chief financial officer or the chief nursing officer, someone also on that. And then what an investigation is conducted. And then they discuss it and decide, was there a breach? And then someone writes down their findings and conclusions in that incident report, usually. So there's an initial incident report that's usually, usually it's electronic systems. Like the most common ones are Epic, Midas, or Meditech, and they file it electronically. And then what happens is as they get more data, they enter into the system so that they end up with a final report that has what happened, what they found through their investigation, and then whether they think there was a breach in some way, and then what they recommend to avoid it in the future.
Okay.
The ad hoc thing probably would not have happened. And it is possible a lot of incidents are not investigated, either because they're too busy or they're minor enough, there wasn't really patient harm. And so they may not go on a full investigation. And frankly, when they're overwhelmed and understaffed, they don't. I worked on a giant medical malpractice claim against a local Colorado hospital where they were not properly sterilizing their surgical instruments. They were going through the sterilization process, but they were arriving the scalpels and other things in the operating room with blood and bone and dead bugs and hair on them. And being used on patients. So we represented 171 patients that had post-operative infections and filed them in big batch lawsuits with their spouses as well. So we had 276 claimants in 12 different lawsuit batches. And what happened is people were filing occurrence reports, as what they called them there, into the system, and nobody was following up on them for years. And then finally in 2017, they're like, this is bad. We should work on this. Let's create a team and retrain everybody on how to fix it. And it did not get better. And we knew there was a whole bunch of stuff that was coming because we think the doctors threatened to release their internal emails. And so they gave them to us. I'm air quoting gave the lawyers on the other side right before we settled. We think there is a trove of documents about to be released by the doctors who were pissed because a surgeon doesn't have the ability to control the sterility of their instruments. They're like, hand me my instrument. And everyone in the room, you can't see bacteria. We all learned that if you didn't know before COVID, now you know. And so if there's blood on it, okay, that's a problem. But if there's other bacteria, you can't see it. And these instruments are so complicated that you can't see if there's still someone's bone from a knee surgery hidden deep inside this complicated instrument. And so they were getting pissed. So these emails came out, only 12 pages. And the doctors were raging, saying, there was a pen in my tray of medical devices today. A pen. They're just
that's
all of them.
Might as well leave a cell phone in there.
Yeah, all them complaining and screaming at the chief medical officer and the chief executive officer, saying, you are forcing me to violate my Hippocratic oath. You are completely negligent. They were raging. And this was 2018, 2019, 2020. Yeah.
And then sterilization, this is something that we've understood for a century.
Yep.
So why? Wow. Okay.
They were just understaffed. They were hiring people who had worked for Chick-fil-A and were paying them $16 an hour, which you can make at the Home Depot, and you're not scrubbing instruments. And if you follow the process and do things correctly and as staff, there's no good reason for that. But the problem is, when you have 2/3, if you need 30 people and you have 20, and you're doing too many surgeries and the demand is really high, what happens is people start cutting corners. So if you have friends coming over for dinner and you have a dinner party and you wash the dishes and you put them in the dishwasher, but then you have friends coming over for breakfast the next morning and you only have 5 plates and you have 5 friends coming over for dinner and you need your plates again. Maybe you don't run the dishwasher through the full cycle. Maybe you're in a hurry and you don't pre-scrub them and you just throw them in and maybe they're a little crusty when they come out. That's what happens. And at the end of the day, if you don't pre-wash them carefully, and a lot of times they were just throwing them in what's called a steam sterilizer, which is like a microwave with steam. And so their defense was, yeah, there was blood on there, but don't worry, it was steamed at 400 degrees. It's sterile blood. It's okay. Would you eat
Might
off
as
a
well
bloody
say,
fork?
I peed on it and urine is sterile. You're good.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Crazy.
So we've been going for about an hour now.
Okay.
Let me ask, we haven't talked really at all about Michael Pena's character's death. Is there anything regarding that you want to touch on?
The murder, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope he got processed. It's pretty disturbing in every way. I don't even know what to say about that. I think the only time I've seen that level of intentional acts in my practice is we had a local case, which I was actually helping on. It was another firm. They were trying to hire me and bring me over, but I was like, I can't. I had my big hospital infection case, but it was really messed up. If you Google it, this guy, and this has nothing to do with what happened to Jimmy, but how you can get away with things in the hospital. That's, I think, what it tells you if people aren't being careful. And this guy, it was a nurse, and he was sexually molesting women who were under anesthesia postoperatively. But he was videotaping it as he did it. And he even said, this is your Dexter moment in one video. He goes, this is your Dexter moment. This is it. Yeah. And they had 3 terabytes of data of all of his videos and pictures.
Wow.
Yeah. And it had been happening for over a year. And someone felt wrong. And so they asked for the video. And that's how they found out. And so they started digging. But the problem is, the reason I bring this up is, unfortunately, I think if someone like Dr. Blake in real life did that, which has happened, like we had a weird case here. I didn't work on it. My firm did before I was there, where the person was just taking people's needles and injecting himself and taking their own drugs and then putting their needles back and like giving people hepatitis or risk of hepatitis. Like you're just being a crazy person. But we put doctors and healthcare providers in such a position of trust, and we're in our most vulnerable. And even in the hospital setting, employee to employee, it requires this high level of trust around these really dangerous substances and abilities. And these people have this high level of knowledge. Like Dr. Blink is a genius. He knows all these things. He knows. And so the problem is, I would say in real life, I don't think Dr. Blake getting away with it, or a complete psychopath like he is, I think that's a possibility. I don't think that, I think that's one of the most realistic parts of the movie, is that if someone really wanted to do that, like a Dr. Blake, he would probably eventually get caught. But things happen, and that's not to terrify people. I think 99% of healthcare providers, besides the corporate greed, doctors care, nurses care, people make mistakes, and there's a few bad apples, for lack of a better term. I hate that term now, out there. But I think it could happen. I don't know if that was where you're going with that. No one's going to go to the doctor ever again now.
No, I didn't know if there were any like particular legal issues that you wanted to add there, but that's all interesting. The aspect of it that occurred to me as I was watching it is he's blackmailing Dr. Blake with this journal.
Yeah.
And it's unclear to me what Diane could have written in her journal that would in any way implicate him.
Yeah, I see that.
I don't. To be clear, like he kisses her while she's unconscious. He does a bunch of stuff that she's unaware of. So I don't know what would have been in this journal that would have been incriminating.
They should have shown us, but I could imagine her having a fantasy about him and writing it as if it was real. suggesting that they were having a relationship. And based on the way he was acting, if they started investigating it, maybe they would look closer, too close, and discover the other things.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could think of. I don't know. That was there were some odd plot points. I really hope that people don't confuse the show with the movie. I probably, even though it was an interesting watch, I don't know if I'd recommend the Good Doctor movie, but the show is lovely. The show's great. If you haven't seen it, great watch.
Good to know. I have not seen it. Let's get into recommendations. We end every episode with whether we think, first, whether it got the law to the extent that it addresses the law, whether it got it right, and then was it entertaining. And you are our subject matter expert. Were the events in the movie something did it go down the way it would in a hospital in the real world? Were the hospitals?
Yeah, I think some of it, no. I think the whole incident with Mr. Sanchez was a bit unrealistic. I think nurses can be very difficult to doctors, so I thought that was somewhat realistic. Sure. But usually they do it behind their back, not to their face. And the documentation, obviously not realistic. The rest of it, obviously, the psychotic way he was behaving, but the way he was able to hide it. If there was really a psychopath like that in a hospital context, I could see him getting away with some of that stuff and being able to manipulate some of the things he did. But there weren't most of the criminal issues most of the legal issues were criminal in nature and less civil in nature.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think the fact that they didn't have enough evidence at first, potentially to prosecute him for Diane's death, is possible. I don't know. There wasn't a lot of civil issues, and I'm a civil lawyer. Even though I've worked at the days off in AG's office in law school, I can't comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. Same. Entirely civil, even though I did some intern stuff in law school. Okay. And in terms of just general entertainment value, would you recommend? Yay or nay?
If someone likes psychologically type of thrillers, or even though it's not that, but it had that feeling to me.
Sure.
It reminded me of The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Okay.
Yeah. If people are dark, or if they like French films that end depressingly, I would recommend it.
Okay.
But generally, it was kind of slow, a lot of unexplained plot points, and Orlando Bloom wasn't particularly hot, so nothing.
Okay.
Not a great. And I did look up the Rotten Tomatoes review, and it got 66% overall approval. So yeah, I'd say I might give it a C-, though. I'd be a little more generous.
All right. Fair enough. I will defer to you on the medical/legal aspects of things.
Oh, I thought you were going to defer to me on the Orlando Bloom attractiveness.
Sure. I don't really have a problem assessing whether a guy is attractive or not. He seemed fine. I don't know.
They usually do a better job making him look more attractive in Pirates of the Caribbean or something else, but they really work to make him not as kind of nerdy and dowdy a bit.
Sure. He wasn't Legolas or anything.
Yeah.
As far as entertainment value, I'm going to be a bit harsher and say I would not personally recommend it or watch it again. I had to watch it. I'm going to have to watch it to pull clips to drop into the conversation we've had.
All right.
No, don't apologize. We asked you to come to do this. But I watched most of the second half at 1.5 times speed. And then, so for those who aren't aware, it's available to watch for free on YouTube. And on YouTube, if you change your speed settings, it continues to apply to later videos. So as I then moved on to watch other things, I was like, what's going on? Everyone's talking really fast. I changed my playback settings. So I don't think I can recommend a movie where I sped it up and then as I was watching it, forgot that it was sped up because you really couldn't tell. Because you're right.
Really
it was
slow, so it kind of
slow.
probably felt normal.
Yeah, it did. All right. Megan, thank you so much for joining me for this. This was supposed to be initially me, Derek, and Mike, and it just didn't happen. So I appreciate you coming on, just talk to me. And yeah, if you ever want to join us, talk about another medical malpractice issue in a movie, we'd welcome you back on.
Okay, I will. Thanks. It was really fun. It's my first podcast ever. And so it was a pleasure.
Welcome.
Okay. Thanks. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again.
You're welcome.
The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwapi LLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2026, all rights reserved.